Have you ever thought what it would have been like to have been one of Jesus' disciples? I actually think he would have been pretty hard to follow because he was always passing out these mixed messages, like this text for today. There must have been times, if I were his disciples, I would have been saying, Jesus, make up your mind. Which is it, one or the other? Peter often did this. You know, Peter sees Jesus trying to wash his feet at the Last Supper, and then later, before Pilate, he seems to be admitting that he's a king, but Peter wants to say, Jesus, which are you, a king or a servant? I mean, you can't wash my feet if you're a king. Which is it? Make up your mind. On the cross, Jesus says to his mother, Woman, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother, to the beloved disciple. But earlier, you remember when he's speaking somewhere and they say, your mother is at the door, your mother is here. And he says, who is my mother or my brother or my sister? And seems to dismiss her. Come on, Jesus, which is it? Make up your mind. At one point, he says, blessed are the peacemakers. And later he says, I've not come to bring peace, but a sword. Which is it? Do you want us to go out on a retreat or out on the Mount of Transfiguration to get away from it all and pray? Or do you want us to make disciples of all nations going to all the world? Which is it? Do you have a respect for life and then turn around and curse the poor little fig tree that doesn't seem to produce? Which is it, Jesus? Make up your mind. Jesus reminds me of my parents when I first got my driver's license and began to drive and was beginning to date, and they would say to me right at the beginning, before I went out, now, have you got enough gas for the car? Drive carefully, be nice, be a gentleman, be friendly to the parents, find out what church she goes to. They always asked that, which was kind of interesting. And, good eye contact, firm handshake, shoes shine. Don't eat with your mouth open. Eat with your mouth closed. Don't hog the conversation. Did we say be nice, be a gentleman? They just kept saying the same thing over and over. And remember to be home on time. And then they always added, oh, and have a good time. You see, which is it? Now, Jesus seems to hand out what appear to be contradictory pronouncements. They are all true, but they are held in tension, which is one reason that we should never selectively quote Jesus from one place or another, because we are doing proof texting then, and we may be naming something that is in contradiction with something else. So we have to kind of stop and think here about what's really going on in this text. Did you notice how Luke places this story of Mary and Martha right after the Good Samaritan passage, which Susan preached so beautifully last week? And that passage puts emphasis on going out and being in the world. It looks like it's emphasizing action, especially social action, social ministry. Even the lawyer gets it when Jesus says, go and do likewise. But then Luke follows this with the story of Mary and Martha. And you begin to wonder, which is it, Jesus? Are we supposed to go and do? Or are we supposed to sit and listen? Which is what he says to Martha about Mary and how she has the better part. Which is it? Can you make up your mind? And as we look at this text, we begin to try to ask ourselves, what is really at stake here? Is it really the contrast between go and do, or sit and listen, or is there something else going on? We know how preachers tend to preach this text. We've heard the sermons many times. They will tell us to figure out whether we're more like Mary or more like Martha. I could have a show of hands this morning, and it may be about equal, whether you feel like you're more of a Mary or more of a Martha. But I can tell you, every time a preacher preaches this, the Martha types are miffed at both the preacher and Jesus because of the way the story comes out. It's just a fact. It's just they are not happy about the way the story comes out. And if you're a Martha type, you understand that. We had a woman who ran our food service in the church in Texas, and her name was Blanche Petzing, and she ran her kitchen with an iron hand. She fed over 600 homeless every day in the big soup kitchen we had right there at the church. We had lunch for the entire congregation. Anybody wanted to stay after church every Sunday. She fed all the committees. She fed all the different groups that came on our campus. And yes, you guessed it, Blanche was a Martha type. She was a prototype Martha type. And I remember her saying to me once, "You know, Dr. Carl, I've never much liked this story about Mary and Martha, and you better be careful how you preach it or you'll be fixing the next congregational meal." You know, it's important for us to remember that we have a different way of looking at these texts. And maybe it's not just about go and do or sit and listen. Martha's have never really much liked Mary's. Martha's are the doers, Mary's are the dreamers. And Martha's aren't really happy to be around Mary's. Barclay calls this the clash of temperaments, and we often preach it that way, but I'm not sure that's really the right way to preach it. I mean, we often think about the Myers-Briggs personality test, you know, where there are J's who are judging and there are P's who are perceiving. If you've ever taken Myers-Briggs, you understand that. J's like things to be done on time and let's get on with it, let's do it. P's want to talk about it forever. They want to think about it. They want to plan. They want to build consensus. They want to get more input. Now, I will just admit to you, I'm a J. I'm a J on the Myers-Briggs. The staff knows it. Committees who work with J's and P's know about the differences of the way these personalities work. I'm a J. I just admit it. I mean, my sermon is always written by noon on Friday. It's done, you know, and then I can start working on it, getting ready to preach it here in a place like this on Sunday morning. Now, if a P did not have to get up and give a sermon, would continue to write it for the rest of that person's life. I have known P's not here, but on other staffs who were still editing their sermons as they came into the pulpit. Now, you have two different kinds of personalities here with Mary and Martha. And Martha is clearly a J, and Mary is clearly a P. You have this sort of clash of personalities. But I don't think this text is about go and do versus sit and listen, or contemplative prayer versus social justice in the world. I don't think that's really what's going on here. I think there's something more. And if we look a little deeper, we will begin to understand. Now, and preachers try different tacks with this text. One tack that is given often is that Jesus is raising the status of women. And that is certainly something that is going on in this text. There's just no question about that. I mean, in Jesus' day, it was unheard of to go to a woman's home. Martha has welcomed him, and he's gone to that home. And it's even more unheard of for a woman to sit at his feet like one of the disciples. Let me give you the contrast of how unheard of this was. What an amazing exploding of the social taboo this was when Jesus listened to Mary and then lifted her up as doing the better part. The rabbis in his day would say things like this: "It is better to burn the Torah than to teach it to your daughter." They would say things like, these are quotes from that era. They would say things like, "It is better to teach your daughter to be a prostitute than to teach her the Torah." So when Jesus allowed Mary to sit at his feet like a disciple, he was exploding the social taboo of his day. Just as the Good Samaritan story transforms our understanding of neighbor and expands it, so in this story, Jesus literally is raising the status of women. And the church has been dealing with this for centuries. I remember when I first started teaching at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in the fall of 1975, so it's almost 41 years ago now. I remember a woman came into my class who was amazingly bright. She had been a dean of students at a major university. She had been a speech professor, an English professor. She'd been a missionary in Egypt. When she graduated, she won more than one of the graduate fellowships. Now, our new associate pastor won the graduate fellowships in Hebrew and Greek when he graduated a year ago. Well, she won 5 of the 6 graduate fellowships. She was amazingly bright, but I'll never forget passing out the syllabus the first day, said you need to do an outline for your first sermon and turn it in next week. And she came up to me and said, "Could I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, "Can we go to your office?" I said, "Sure." And we went into my office. I had a little office there, and she started crying. And I said, "What is the matter?" I said, "First of all, this is like baseball. There is no crying in homiletics. So you know, what is this, you know?" And she goes, "I can't sit down and physically write this first outline." And I said, "Why? You're an amazingly competent woman." And she said, "I've never seen a woman preach." And the earth kind of moved for me at that moment, and I realized how important it was for women to have good models, for young people, for girls to have good models like we do on our pastoral staff today. And I began thinking about ways to give women permission to be in the pulpit. Jesus was doing that in this story. There is no question that he is raising the status of women in the way he deals with Mary and Martha. But I don't even think that's the main point of this story. It took the theologian Paul Tillich to help me understand that the main point of this story has to do with the context of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem, which mirrors our journey. And in essence, what we are asking is, who will understand what this journey is all about? Who will catch the idea that the kingdom is seen in the person of Jesus, and Mary is the one who gets it? You see, Martha is interested in Jesus. She is taking Jesus very seriously, but only as a human being. So she provides for his physical needs, and these are very important. I mean, bread and food and clothing, all these things are important, but Mary sees that there is something more going on here. Mary doesn't see Jesus just as a human being. Mary sees Jesus as the very Son of God. Martha provides a sumptuous feast, but Mary wants a better dish. Martha provides a bread that perishes, but Mary wants a bread that does not perish. So you see, both Mary and Martha are on the journey of faith. It's just that Mary is a little further down the road of it. It's not that Martha is wrong and Mary is right. It is just that Mary is beginning to understand who this really is, just as you and I, as we come to church Sunday after Sunday, or as we open the Bible and begin to learn who this Jesus, we need to see that this really is the Son of God and the Savior of the world, not just a good man to teach us a few things. Mary understands this in a way that Martha doesn't quite yet get it. So I want to suggest this morning, I think Tillich is exactly right on this, that the real contrast is not between go and do or sit and listen, because both of those are important in our ministry to the world. No, the real contrast is between focusing totally on tertiary or secondary concerns like food and shelter and those important things, but they're only tertiary, and the ultimate concern, which is our relationship with God. You see, when we make the tertiary or secondary concerns the ultimate concern in our life, then we are overwhelmed with worry and anxiety. Jesus says to Martha, "You are concerned with many things." And that's the way a lot of us are these days, isn't it? We come to church, we come on a Sunday morning and we feel fractured and scattered and pulled in many different directions. Jesus says you're like Martha if you're feeling that way. You're worried over what's happening in the world and what's happening in our community. It's good to be concerned, but when you're worried about it, then it becomes your ultimate concern. He says, only one thing is needed. And Mary understands what that one thing is. And that is to make her ultimate concern an unconditional belief in her relationship with God. She gets that in a way that Martha hasn't quite gotten it yet. It's not that Martha's wrong. She's just not at the same place that Mary is. We had a medical school professor in our church in Dallas who was a lovely man, a beloved teacher at the medical school, beloved Sunday school teacher. And at his funeral, we all noted that he never took himself very seriously. But like Mary, he took God very seriously. So, maybe the thing we should say when we read this text is not, Jesus, make up your mind, because Jesus has already made up his mind. No, maybe we need to make up ours. To God be the glory from this day forth and forever.